And good morning, and welcome to The Skinny for Friday, August 9th. I'm Mitch Perry, senior political reporter for the Florida Phoenix, joined by Ray Roa, the editor-in-chief of Creative Loafing newspaper, and author and independent journalist Ben Montgomery. Good morning, guys.
Hey, good morning.
Morning, Mitch.
Great to have you here, of course. Great to have our listeners here. And today on the show, later in the show, we're going to see sitting down with one of the great writers who profiles our national elected officials. Michael Kruse of Politico and Politico Magazine, and formerly of the St. Petersburg Times, is here in studio. We really look forward to talking to him about, 88 days away now from the election day. But first, also in studio, we have Tampa Bay area Congresswoman Kathy Castor. Congresswoman, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Mitch. It's great to be here on The Skinny.
Yes, absolutely. We had you here almost exactly a year ago. And by the way, today is the 50th anniversary of the resignation of Richard Nixon. I know I'm a few years older than you, but some of these guys were even alive when that happened. Do you remember when Nixon resigned?
It's very foggy. I was a young child, but since my parents were inspired to public service by JFK, it was on in the house. But I don't think it's a time to look backwards at all. It's a time to look forwards. If I'm going to celebrate any anniversary, it's the big one coming up next week, the anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act.
Oh, okay. We'll definitely get into that. And just to remind our listeners who aren't that familiar with Kathy Castor, she has been representing Tampa and Hillsborough County and parts of St. Petersburg and Pinellas County going on 18 years now. She was first elected in 2006 and has won re-election every time since. She is running unopposed in the August 20th Democratic primary, but she'll be on the ballot against a Republican challenger in November. There's a 4-person race there. There's also an NPA and Libertarian candidate running, and we will definitely invite the GOP opponent on once we know who that is later in the month. Okay, so Congresswoman, I really want to, and I said the same thing when we had Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna on here last week. Definitely want to talk about the issues that you're working on and what you want to talk about. But we'll bring up some of the stuff, the presidential stuff, because it is, of course, front and center right now with us. And I can't believe, Democrats seem to me, you mentioned this joy, which we're hearing a lot about in the media the last couple of days. And certainly, I get the joy part because you were a near-death experience maybe a month ago, right? It looked pretty bleak for the Democrats after the debacle of the debate with Joe Biden. And I guess where I want to begin is, so I don't know if you remember a year ago when you were on here, I actually asked you about Joe Biden. I don't know if you recall this because, the polls had been for over a year, Democrats saying, we appreciate Joe Biden. It's great that he came in and defeated Donald Trump in 2020. But we are looking forward, we need somebody new in 2024. We really don't want him to run. But, nobody challenged him. Not until the end of last year, Congressman Dean Phillips from Minnesota was the only person to do that. He didn't fare very well. And yet, basically, there just seemed to be some concerns about Joe Biden. Okay, he had a great State of the Union. People said, okay, he's back. And then he had the debate debacle. And as we all know now, it's, I guess, a little over a month later, he's no longer here. We have Kamala Harris here. I want to talk to you about that, though, the whole situation after the debate, because it took a few days, right? I think Texas Congressman Lloyd Doggett. Do you know?
Sure.
Yeah. No, I thought this guy, I think he's 77 years old. I thought this guy was a patriot himself because he was the first one to come out. It was easier to come out afterwards, but he was the first congressman to say, I think Joe Biden needs to not run for re-election. And then you did come out. You were the only member of the delegation here 2 days before Joe Biden dropped out. I think it was 3 weeks ago today, actually. In fact, I didn't even know about it. I was watching CBS's Face the Nation, and they had a picture of all the members of Congress, Democrats, who had announced for Biden to step down. And your picture was there. And I immediately contacted your staff. I didn't know about this. I guess it was Friday. You talked to News Channel 8. Why did you come out at that time and say that Joe Biden should step down? Because you were steadfast in saying no, he was okay.
Yeah, you're right. This has been a remarkable, historic time that we've just lived through, and yes, the joy and enthusiasm has returned. Joe Biden has served our country well for many years. He was the steady hand that we needed to defeat Donald Trump, to bring us back from the COVID pandemic and all the economic fallout from that. And he has accomplished more in his one term than most presidents do in 2 terms. And he's had a particular focus in the cost of living and protecting our freedoms. But that debate was a shocker. And we, members of Congress, we simply reflected our neighbors, the opinions of our neighbors. And I heard from a lot of concerned Tampa Bay area friends. So that was, we were we were really trying to give the president space to make a decision, did not want to interrupt the very important NATO summit where, I mean, what Joe Biden has done there to rally the world, especially the Europeans, to stand up to Putin's aggression in Ukraine is remarkable. But it was a wake-up call. But I don't think anyone would have predicted this kind of launch for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. I just got off a Florida call with the Harris campaign and Nikki Fried, who leads the Florida Democratic Party. There have been 17,000 new volunteers who have said that they intend to work to elect Kamala Harris. That's the most of any state. And they are coming from every county across the state of Florida, every age group. They're Democrats, they're Republicans, they're no party affiliated, and 60% of them are new to the electoral process. But we know that DeSantis and the MAGA movement, they have tried to suppress votes out there. It's very important folks get their vote by mail ballot. They have their plan to vote. Early voting is ratcheted up now across the state, and it's all hands on deck.
One last thing, and then we'll move on about Joe Biden, because this is, I think, a profound thing that happened. And in fact, he still was the president. I know you wrote an op-ed about him the other day, right? He's still the president for like 5 more months here. Anita Dunn, who was one of his top advisors, she did an interview with Politico, Ryan Lizza, that's on Politico's website this morning. And she says this because she really felt like, okay, he had a bad debate. She said, but they did a focus group and apparently it wasn't so bad. She says, so Trump didn't gain any ground in the debate whatsoever. This is Anita Dunn speaking. And we actually picked up a few votes in the group. So it was a bad debate, but it didn't feel catastrophic at all, certainly in terms of voters. And I think other people who did independent research saw roughly the same thing. If you go back and look at the polls, what you see is you didn't see much movement whatsoever coming out of the debate because the structure of this campaign had really been fairly static for a long time, and the debate didn't change that. And then Ryan Lissa says, what did change? It was, then she says, what did change was 24 days of unremitting negative, horrible attacks on Joe Biden. Lissa says, from his own party. She says, yes, from his own party and the press. So, again, the point is that Joe Biden, and maybe he'll say it in his book, we really haven't heard why he stepped down. I mean, other than the pressure was. Now, what she says, were you seeing and hearing? Because that's what I guess we heard is that Democrats were saying, no, this is going to be bad for us. We're battling to get back the House, and the Senate's going to be tough anyway. So you're looking at losing all 3, the presidency, all chambers of power in Washington. So could you just respond to that? Because Anita Dunn basically says it wasn't for the Democrats, and people like yourself, maybe he'd still be running for re-election.
No, I think people want to focus on the future. And when it was President Biden and Donald Trump, they were afraid of this would be a campaign focused on the past. And we have big problems to solve in this country, and people want to look forward. And yes, I thought that after that debate, people are pretty solid in who they support. There probably aren't many undecided voters, but it's an enthusiasm thing. Are people going to turn out? Are they going to feel motivated to go to the polls and talk to their friends and neighbors, talk to their folks, go to church or in the grocery store with them? And I think it's proven out now with this joyous response to this historic and important candidacy of Kamala Harris and Tim Walz.
Will you be in Chicago for the DNC?
I will.
Any concerns? I mean, maybe it's been tamped down a little bit, but we saw this even in Michigan the other night. The issue with Israel and Hamas kind of surfaced the other night with some activists there with Vice President Harris. Do you think that might blow up at all at the convention, that issue?
It's hard to tell. I think folks are ready to look ahead. Hopefully we get to a ceasefire and we get the hostages released. I think Netanyahu has been a problem, and Hamas is evil, and we're all kind of steeling ourselves for Iran's response. But God bless that we've had outstanding diplomats and military members who are over there now trying to tamp down the conflagration.
Again, we're talking to Tampa Bay area Democratic Congresswoman Kathy Castor here. So let's talk about some of the issues. Data privacy. Now, this is an issue where, in some cases, some people say that Tallahassee's kind of, done something positive here. There is a bill that the Children and Teens Online Privacy Protection Act, and then the Kids Online Safety Act. And I guess it was that was the one that just passed the Senate this
They
last
both
week.
just passed the Senate.
So tell us about that and why you support them.
Well, we have a mental health crisis in America, especially among young people. Suicide rates are up, especially among young girls. In fact, I was at a local chamber meeting yesterday, and one hospital leader said that he was in the ER and a 6-year-old boy had come in who had tried to commit suicide, and they asked why. There is too much going on online. The U.S. Surgeon General says part of the contributing factor to this mental health crisis among young people is social media. So for many years, I've led the charge in Congress for more tools for parents and more guardrails for the big tech companies. And Gus Bilirakis and I are leading a bipartisan bill, the Kids Online Safety Act. I have another bipartisan bill with Representative Wahlberg of Michigan, a very conservative guy, on the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. That would prohibit these tech companies from tracking kids, from gathering their personal private information. Will give parents more control. The COSA requires a new design standards so that they're not designing social media and other apps for kids to keep them addicted and keep them hooked. And lo and behold, it passed the U.S. Senate last week, 91-3. So we are going to press hard for it to pass this session. When does something pass the United States Senate? 91-3. So that's going to be job one.
The resolution for National Ice Cream Day.
Yeah.
By the way, okay, yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I think that, by the way, are we banning TikTok? Whatever happened with that? The whole issue of TikTok.
Yes, that's law. It gives TikTok time now to find new ownership. It is owned by a Chinese company that has to respond to any request by Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party. So hopefully there will be some buyers out there that can purchase TikTok over time.
Let's talk about immigration, because this has been an issue. We'll see how Kamala Harris, I know she has an ad out this morning talking very robustly, strongly about immigration, which I think, the Democrats need, because this has been an issue that has been throughout the year. Joe Biden was really trailing Donald Trump on the issues. Inflation and immigration have been really top of mind with a lot of voters. I know Democrats' line has basically been on this. That was that James Langford bill from the Oklahoma senator, Republican, that had a lot of things in there that seemingly conservatives would like, in terms of border security, that Donald Trump said don't go for it, so it went away. I asked this of Congresswoman Luna last week, and she's definitely very on the far right when it comes to this issue. And I said, do you know? I mean, this is the thing: Democrats and Republicans, as you know, Kathy, after 18 years there, you got to vote together. You have to have these bipartisan votes to really, with a 60-vote filibuster. I think the public is demanding something to be done on immigration comprehensively, but really on the border. I mean, the security part first, maybe, before you look about who's going to be allowed to stay in legally. So what are your thoughts about that and about working with your Republican colleagues on that?
Yeah, I think most people, I don't care how they're registered, believe in strong and secure borders. That's why it was completely outrageous that when Democrats and Republicans came together on a tough but fair immigration reform bill, border protection bill, that Donald Trump said, oh, no, don't pass it, because that could help the Democrats in the election. It's an example of how everything has to revolve around Donald Trump. He is focused on what benefits him, not what benefits our country. So the good news is that border crossings are at a low, I believe, for the Biden administration, after President Biden said, okay, if Congress, if you're not going to pass some bipartisan reform, I'm going to have to act. So he had to institute some guidance by executive order. But we've got to have immigration reform. Our local businesses are crying out for legal workers. We are in a labor squeeze right now, and it's leading. It does impact higher costs when you don't have the workers you need. I think this would help bring down inflation if we can solve some of the immigration problems and get people on a legal path to work. And let's make sure that our dreamers and their families also who have been here and no other country but the U.S. have that legal pathway to citizenship.
The president did, support the Langford bill, and he also came out with some kind of restrictions earlier this year as well. Did he do that too late, though? I mean, you're right. The numbers are down now, but they've been the all-time high the last couple of years. I think we have more folks here in even the Tampa Bay area, like the Cuban community, than I've heard people say that we've ever had here, basically, because it hasn't just been Central Americans and Mexicans. It's been people from China and all over the place have been coming through. It's been unprecedented numbers the last couple of years.
Our economy is the strongest in the world. It is an incredible magnet for people from other countries to come here and find work. It's been the Congress's failure. Really, the Republicans, they don't want to work on pathways to work and pathway to citizenship. Donald Trump continues to say, I'm going to fund a mass deportation of people rather than find real solutions. So I'm hopeful the Democrats take the House. We have partners in the Senate. And President Kamala Harris will have this as a top-tier issue.
When you hear from constituents on that issue, do you feel like they're informed? Do they have a clear picture of the issues at the border, or are they influenced by media that is encouraging them to think that it is something that it's not?
Yeah, there is a difference of opinion. If they're Fox News watchers, it's very high on their list. But the beauty of the Tampa Bay area is that we're a community that generation after generation, we renew ourselves. People have come from the early days of Ybor City, Cuba, Spain, Italy, Germany, all over. And so many people understand that immigrant experience. But yes, they want legal. They want people to come legally. And that is the aim of bipartisan immigration reform if we can get there. Again,
if you're just tuning in right now, we're speaking with Tampa Bay Area Congresswoman Kathy Castor, Democrat here, who has been representing the area since 2006. Congresswoman, let's talk about abortion rights. This is huge this year with Amendment 4 on the ballot here. Currently, we're under a 6-week ban, which some people say women do not even know that they're pregnant at that early stage. Donald Trump had a big press conference yesterday. He talked a little bit about this. Democrats are, of course, this is one of their stronger issues. If immigration is one of their weakest ones, this one is one of their stronger ones. Now, Democrats, and I believe you may say this yourself, that Donald Trump is going to, put a federal law in and ban abortion outright. The former president has said no. He says, I want to leave the states to deal with this. You don't take him at his word.
No. I've been watching what's going on in the House of Representatives and the Congress. They intend to adopt a national abortion ban. And when we say that, part of that is because they would like to restrict mifepristone, that safe and effective drug. And just because the United States Supreme Court said in a recent case that FDA, it should be made available, they fully intend to come back and rehear whether mifepristone can be available across America. And when you're talking about a fundamental right that matters to every American, you can't say, okay, leave it up to the states. That's kind of going back to racist civil rights fights that we worked ourselves through for decades. This is a fundamental right to make your own personal health care decisions, and not having Ron DeSantis or Donald Trump or the MAGA crowd, Marjorie Taylor Greene, come in and interfere with that decision that it's very personal and you need to make. And this Florida 6-week ban is cruel and costly and outrageous. We already know, and I've spoken to many doctors-to-be that do not intend to apply for residency here in the state of Florida. The Association of Medical Colleges now has data that is proving that out, and that's not fair or right for everyone who expects to see the best doctor when they need that kind of care. I hope folks are focused on this abortion rights amendment, that's Amendment 4 on our ballot. That's another reason to make sure you have your vote by mail ballot, that you are registered, because remember, the Republicans, DeSantis, and the GOP in Tallahassee made it harder for you to vote by mail. You better check it now to make sure that you are going to receive that ballot, that your registration is lined up, and get out and vote in the primaries and practice for November.
Now, I know that the Democrats have said this, talking about an abortion ban on the conservative side, or quote-unquote pro-life side, but you would like to codify Roe v. Wade into law. Now, you need, and I said this to them when we had the CD13 Democrats here a few weeks ago, you can't do that right now with the way this Congress is structured, with the filibuster, right? So let me ask you this. We'll see how Senate and House play out in November. Would you support getting rid of the filibuster, though? Because, otherwise it seems like it's going to be hard to get 60 votes if you win the House back and you have Kamala Harris as president, still to do that.
That's why it's so important for folks to vote for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, to turn the House back to Democrats, and to defeat Rick Scott, Debbie Mucra-Salpal. If you want to do something for fundamental rights, the right to make your own health care decisions, Debbie Mucra-Salpal has to be elected to the U.S. Senate, because we can get close to 60 votes. And even if we can't, this is such a fundamental right. This would be a strong reason to dispense with the filibuster on this case when you're talking about a fundamental civil right.
So you would support that?
Yes.
Okay. Also want to ask you, Biden brought this up a couple weeks ago, and this has been bandied about a lot lately because Democrats in particular are very unhappy with the Supreme Court. Supreme Court justice reform. Now, the president put it out there in a way, I don't know if he meant like a constitutional amendment or a bill, but let's just talk about what you would prefer if you had a choice or a chance to do this. Some people have talked about term limits for Supreme Court justices, maybe 18 years. I think Biden did mention that. Others have talked about mandatory retirement age. We have that in Florida. It used to be 70, now it's 75. What are your thoughts?
First of all, they need to be held accountable for their ethics breaches. There needs to be an enforceable ethics code for Justice Clarence Thomas to take these exorbitant trips funded by interests that have cases pending before the United States Supreme Court. It undermines confidence in their decision-making. The confidence in the Supreme Court is at an all-time low. And part of it is their corruption. The other part is that they just seem to be doing the bidding of powerful special interests. If you go back to Citizens United, that it gutted campaign finance laws, that tilted the playing field towards moneyed, powerful special interest, do you go to stealing the Supreme Court nomination from Barack Obama, and they all went along with that, to issues today, to overturning 50 years of precedent that stood as Roe v. Wade to make sure that women and their families could make those personal, private decisions. I think I would start with the ethics code, and I think maybe the mandatory retirement age as well.
It feels to me like everything goes back to Citizens United. But I wonder, is there an avenue for someone like you to pursue accountability with these justices, or have they not violated whatever existing code of ethics there is?
Well, they've tried to encourage Chief Justice Roberts to be come down harder on the ethics breaches by Clarence Thomas and Justice Alito. If he's going to abdicate his responsibility to do that, yes, the Congress can pass an enforceable ethics code.
Let's talk about climate change, which I know is a huge issue for you.
It's a huge issue because it's so freaking hot out there.
Literally, this summer.
And the costs and the impacts are...
The water is hot. The water is hot.
The water is hot. Electric bills are high. Florida should be a leader in clean energy. We have abundant, clean, free resources from the sun, but... The GOP, the MAGA movement, they do the bidding of utilities and fossil fuel companies. And if people want to get angry and do something about their high electric bills and property insurance, they need to elect Democrats to the state House and state Senate.
By the way,
all up and down the ballot.
Yeah, in Clearwater, it looks like they're looking at maybe getting rid of Duke Energy and doing energy with their own, which other communities have done in Florida. That is something where people can actively get involved with that. I know they're going to do a big study, going to cost several $100,000, but you're seeing that with some local communities. And there's a little controversy in St. Petersburg with Duke Energy on that front. But let's talk, okay, so climate change, you were, of course, from 18 to 22, the former chair of the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis when the Democrats controlled the House. How is the world, Congresswoman, how is the world doing this? I know we can talk about America, but this is a global issue. I know there's going to be the COP29 climate change, United Nations sponsored climate negotiations in Azerbaijan coming up in a few months. There's some happiness there. Apparently, some of the poor countries think that let's see here. They're struggling with climate change, and they're saying that the list of the wealthier countries that was drawn up in the 1990s doesn't include countries like China or Saudi Arabia, who could now, they're not considered like one of the richer countries now, wealthier countries. So in terms of like the world dealing with this, do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, at the last United Nations Conference of Parties, all of the countries on the planet agreed for the first time to phase out fossil fuels, and they put more resources towards vulnerable countries. The problem is there's nothing binding in that. But I have to tell you how refreshing it was to attend the COP, as they call it, with America's historic clean energy law finally passed into law that is unleashing clean energy resources all across the country. There has now been thousands of new jobs created in clean energy manufacturing, in solar panels, in EV batteries, in EVs. About $500 million of private investment now coming. It's hard to see here in Florida because DeSantis and the GOP MAGA movement, they have us way far behind. But we are making remarkable progress. And if people want to do something here, again, it's getting involved in elections, but there are all sorts of new tax credits available for local communities, for school districts, for nonprofits, churches, mosques, synagogues. I'm having a big sit down next week, a big seminar with our local architects, because architects and developers have to know about these major cost savings. Everybody needs to put money back into their pocket right now, and there are enormous new savings for if your air conditioner might work now. But if it goes on the fritz, you need to know that you can save thousands of dollars on a new energy-efficient heat pump. Same goes with insulation in your home. Of course, solar, EV tax credits are out there. And this is making a massive difference. Florida is behind, and it's costing us a lot because those utilities that really control the legislature have kept us hooked on gas. So we generate in Florida 75% of our electricity from gas.
Natural gas.
So when you have these price spikes and it's volatile, that's one of the reasons people's electric bills are out of sight, and they make it very hard for the average working Floridian and companies to install solar. But this is happening at the grassroots level.
There is more solar, though, right? Because it's cheaper, right? So some of these, the Dukes, the Ticos are doing more than they ever have before, at least.
They have,
yeah.
But they want to control it all. And we need to democratize what is happening here. There's no reason that the utilities are going to call all the shots and put up the fees. Part of the historic climate portions of the Inflation Reduction Act are intended to spur grassroots savings through solar and energy efficiency. It's happening, but if we had partners in Tallahassee, we would be a lot farther.
We just have a few minutes left with the Congresswoman here, Congresswoman Kathy Castor here. I want to talk to you for a moment about what happened this week in Missouri, where Democratic Congresswoman Cori Bush lost a primary race to Wesley Bell. It's a race where AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, their political arm, the United Democracy Project, spent a reported $9 million to take down Cori Bush. Earlier this year in a Democratic primary, AIPAC spent millions to oust fellow squad member Jamal Bowman. My question is so much about it's AIPAC here. It could be another group. The fact that so much outside, money being spent here. We talked about Citizens United here. Does that concern you? I mean, you're in a district. It's relatively safe for a Democrat, but say some other Democrat gets some big money, and can throw some ads up there, maybe take you down. Any thoughts about that?
I didn't follow the dynamics of those races, but there is one thing that sticks out to me. Both of those members, Bowman and Bush, voted against the bipartisan infrastructure law. And I can't imagine, I don't know why you would do that. This is the historic law that is making our streets safer, that's making investments in the community. For example, here at Palmetto Beach, we just got a $24 million grant. That's that working class neighborhood south of Ybor City that needs better drainage. They need sidewalks. They need safer streets. The infrastructure law is rebuilding a bulkhead at Port Tampa Bay. It's invested millions of dollars in our airports. It's providing new transit resources, and something tells me that may have also had played a role in their defeat.
Okay, before we let you go, there's actually a couple of callers here, and I want to give them a chance, if you don't mind, because they've been waiting here for a long time here, and then we're going to move on to Michael Cruz here. So, Simon, you've been waiting a very long time. You want to ask a question to Congresswoman Castor?
Yeah, I'll make it real quick. It'll be interesting to see if any one of you will be buying an electric vehicle soon. My question is the fact that Josh Shapiro wasn't picked in Pennsylvania, which one would think strategically would have been the choice that most strategists would have picked. When looking at the Democratic Party, and you use the word progressive, as a Jewish person, should I be concerned when the word progressive and the fact that there's a tendency and definitely a leaning towards a component of anti-Semitism in the progressive movement, which is part of the Democratic Party? And why should a Jewish person vote for a Democrat given that?
Okay, Simon, thank you. Thank you for the question. I'm taking you off here.
Simon, I strongly disagree with you that if you're a progressive, you're anti-Israel. To the contrary, we've stood by our friends in Israel. The Jewish people, they needed our support and help after October 7th. We stood up to Hamas. We've supported them with Iron Dome and other resources. But among a lot of my Jewish friends, they see Netanyahu as a real barrier to moving forward to defeat Hamas and to build peace across the Middle East. But we're going to stand by our friend, the only democratic country in that area. The Biden administration and leaders are working very hard now to build a coalition across the Middle East that gives Israel and the Palestinian people a pathway towards peace.
Okay, and there was one last caller, John from Port Richey. You have a quick second here with Congresswoman Castor.
Hey, thanks for the show. The drug, mifepristone, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's shipped across state lines, correct?
That's correct, and that's one of the reasons that they have it in their sights to ban it.
The Comstock Act.
Well, but here's my question. Wouldn't that fall under federal jurisdiction under the Commerce Clause, so that way the states couldn't ban it? I mean, that makes common sense to me. Like, they did it with chicken.
Did he just solve
They can do it with this.
Solve the issue.
Well, what they intend to do in the Congress is to pass a ban in the Congress. That's spelled out in Trump's Project 2025. And if you hold a lot of strings when you have the executive branch, that you can direct the FDA to do certain things. So that's why a vote for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz is a vote for freedom, reproductive freedom.
All right. And on that moment, we're going to say thank you so much, Congresswoman Kathy Castor, for coming in the studio.
Thank you, Mitch. It's always a great discussion.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much, Congresswoman Kathy Castor. Again, she will be on the ballot in November here in Hillsborough County and Pinellas. I'm in St. Petersburg. She's actually my congresswoman there because of gerrymandering, whatever you want to call it. Yes, I love St. Pete too. Okay, thank you, Congresswoman. So we're going to have Michael Cruz come on here in just a second. Michael Cruz, Ben, will you pick it up? Tell us about Mike.
Senior staff writer at Politico and Politico Magazine. Michael Cruz has won the National Press Foundation's Dirksen Award for distinguished reporting on Congress, back-to-back National Headliner Awards for his coverage of Donald Trump in the congressional race in Ohio, and a Toner Prize honorable mention for excellence in national political reporting. Before that, As our listeners might know him, he worked on the enterprise staff at the Tampa Bay Times and shared a cubicle wall with yours truly. We had a fun time together for about 10 years or so at the Times. Before that, I knew Michael even upstate New York, the Times Herald Record. So we go way back and have shared quite a few newsrooms together. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thanks. Good to be here with all of you.
You come back to Florida fairly frequently.
My line of work keeps me coming back to Florida. And of course, beyond my work, I still have friends here. So, yes.
Yeah.
Familiar with Florida.
What is the what's the last story you did out of here?
Susie Wiles.
Right.
Yeah, tell us
Profiled
about
Susie Wiles. Spent some time in the Palm Beach area and in the Jacksonville area in the course of that reporting.
For people who don't know Susie Wiles and not heard that name, which is not in the headlines very often, who is she?
She's, for all intents and purposes, the co-campaign manager of Trump 2024. Longtime Jacksonville area Republican political operative, has been a key advisor to Donald Trump off and on for the better part of a decade now, and for the last several years has been arguably his most important advisor.
And she used to work with Ron DeSantis, and they had a bitter breakup.
They did, which provided fuel for her and people around her to do what they did to the governor of the state.
Tell us about that. What was going on in the Trump campaign, and specifically with Susie Wiles when DeSantis sort of broke ranks?
So because of the way it ended with Governor DeSantis, he was particularly personal about the dismissal of Susie Wiles from his operation in Tallahassee fairly early in his tenure as governor. Susie Wiles was sort of on the outs for a second, came back against the wishes of Governor DeSantis, came back into the Trump fold, became increasingly important to Trump. One of the reasons she was so important to Trump is that she brought with her a real understanding of some of the vulnerabilities that DeSantis had, and also brought a handful of extremely loyal aides of hers, all of whom were, in some respects, even more motivated than she was to tear down by then presidential candidate DeSantis, which they did consistently and relentlessly for a year, and very effectively, obviously.
Right.
What were the main, I'm thinking of the Pudding Fingers. Was that attack, was that sort of started by them? Do you know?
For sure.
Tiny D was another sort of insult that Donald Trump slung around a little bit.
There's sort of a psychological understanding of what would get under his skin. And also, in some respects, they, I don't know that I would have put it this way at that time, but now, because we have the word weird in sort of the political vernacular right now, in retrospect, they sort of weirdified DeSantis at the time. He wears boots strange. Right. Look how he dresses, the lifts in his boots, because they know he's conscious about his height and his weight and all these things. And clearly some of those aides who were DeSantis aides at the time are with him when he's eating pudding with his three fingers, and so they find a way to leak that strategically through the Daily Beast first, and then use that to turn it into an ad. I mean, this is all getting sort of stuck in the weeds, but it was a devastating overall portrayal of the governor that made him that shifted Ron DeSantis from what he was entering the presidential cycle, sort of the responsible Trump, quote unquote, to just sort of a bit of a joke.
Do you feel like that diminished him in the psyche of Floridian voters? A lot of people moved to the state, it seems, because he was on Fox News so much during COVID, saying, hey, Republicans move here, we're open, we're free. And many of them did. And I wonder now if he's diminished by the battering he took from the Trump campaign.
Maybe so. I think probably you three would have a better sense of that.
Michael,
time is what it is, and I think it's not like he's politically dead.
Yeah, his numbers are over 50% still right now.
Right.
Michael, you did a story. You did it on DeSantis years ago with, I think, Gary Fineout and Matt Dixon, right? And you sat down with him at one time. And tell us about that, your experience with him one-on-one. There are one of three of you or two of you.
Yeah, it was sort of in the thick of COVID. It was summer of 2020. An empty Tallahassee, an empty Capitol. I remember coming into town and feeling like it was a little eerie in Tallahassee. Met with him in his office. The three of us did for an hour plus. I think at the time he felt like he needed to be a little bit more friendly with national media, like a very different moment, and therefore he was making different decisions about how to interact with people like us. I went in with specific goals of trying to elicit useful material for the profile I was working on. Feel like I did. He went out of his way to sort of have an anti-press posture in very specific ways vis-a-vis me. But always interesting. I'll never, I don't necessarily need or sometimes even angle for access of that kind, but it was useful. It was useful to get to know him in that respect at that time in his development.
Right.
Can I ask you a question about, from a reporting standpoint, in the Wiles piece, they knew he could be awkward or not. You can kind of vet that. You can get anecdotes about that. You mentioned the Daily Beast breaking the pudding thing. But when you're in front of somebody, you need to talk about the pudding thing. Like, how believable is it? When do you start to believe the pudding thing on your own independently?
There are lots of ways to report to a place where that happened, and people who saw it happen, and so you talk to them. And what was interesting to me about the pudding, not so much the incident itself, but just sort of the leveraging of that as a piece of political ammunition. And so it's like any other thing, just sort of reporting around that moment. And at least because I work at a place called Politico, like understanding the political value of that, as dumb as it might be on face.
It's so outrageous. Like, when someone starts talking about it, are you just in disbelief that you're even at a point where we're talking about pudding?
We've been doing this for a while, and I feel like I'm not so surprised at some of these things anymore.
Even a step further, Politico hired a fashion consultant, right, to write about the boots issue.
So Derek Guy, a well-known, million Twitter followers, menswear writer who writes for a variety of places, now does write for Politico magazine, and did in the course of that DeSantis boot cycle, right, about the lifts, and in some ways reported it out, sort of an investigation of the lifts. Kind of ridiculous, but also that's just one of the ways we do what we do at this point.
We want to tell our listeners right now, if you're just tuning in, we're speaking with Michael Kruse from Politico magazine. And Michael used to write, of course, the St. Pete Times. And by the way, because Michael writes a lot of great national profiles of political figures, including Kamala Harris. I want to get to that. But right now, Ben and Michael, I'm going to ask you guys, Tampa Bay Times had some big news this week, right? They're going to be laying off more folks. You both were part of that for many years in its recent glory days. I just want to get your own thoughts about that, because obviously journalism is really, in a precarious place right now. Some of us are in places maybe a little safer than others, but the Times here as an institution here in the Tampa Bay area, what it was and your thoughts about that, right now in terms of what you were doing then and where we're at now.
We were definitely there to, I think, enjoy the heyday. I mean, the staff was probably close to 400 when we got hired about a year apart, but now it's much smaller than that. The newsroom staff, I think, last I heard, was around 100. I can't imagine what that would be like. I thought I would spend my whole career at the St. Pete Times, and in many ways, I'm continued to be surprised at this sort of gradual reduction of this place that I thought would last forever because of its protection from the Poynter Institute, because of its interesting ownership status, because of the community loyalty. I mean, I've always felt like The people of St. Pete loved the Times, if not people all across the Times readership. In my mind, it was some difficult business choices, dealing with real estate and competition with the Tampa Tribune, the old Tampa Tribune. Some decisions were made, and they're living with those decisions right now. It meant taking loans from people who are difficult to pay back. And,
some who are still unknown.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame. It's a source of sadness for me. What continues to happen to newspapers like the St. Pete Times, like the Tampa Bay Times, but in particular that place, which same thing is what Ben just said. It is a place in a different world I would never have left. That's where I wanted to be as a mid-20s precocious up-and-coming reporter. It's literally the newspaper in the United States of America that I targeted as the place I wanted to be.
Really?
Wanted to learn from people who were there, wanted to follow in the footsteps if I could, people who had been there, in the roster of all-stars who'd done such great work and like of a certain kind, and loved my 9.5 years there, but also left because when I did in late 2014, because I couldn't quite see a viable future down the road. At that time, not immediately, but couldn't quite see 5 to 10 years. I couldn't see myself being there 10 years
Really?
From then. And so sort of decided to leave for Politico from a position of strength rather than fleeing what, unfortunately, it's become over the last however many years.
Michael, let me ask you something. Got a press release this week talking about how Ballard Partners was going to relocate to Water Street, Tampa here, as a national reporter who sniffs around and is trying to put himself in places where he can learn some things, maybe off the record and things like that. How significant is that to a reporter who's in charge of keeping power in check, that a powerful entity like Ballard would move here? And where do you suggest they hang out to kind of be in the circles with... I'll just say, for instance, one time I was hanging out and there was a bar. I had a lobbyist confirmed, try to explain to me how they were washing money. So where, how do you do it? And what would you say to somebody who sees Ballard coming here?
Well, Brian has offices in a variety of places around Florida and in Washington. Brian also does not make himself scarce to reporters. He's available usually to talk, often on the record, sometimes not. As somebody who covers politics now, and has for the last 10 years, lobbyists are an important kind of political professional that are extremely valuable as, just folks you talk to. They know stuff, they play their role in the, political profession. And so, Brian, people who work for Brian, people who work for Brian's competitors, my advice to any reporter would just be, have those folks on your phone and chat with them and have drinks and say hello.
You just said that, you, because I remember this when you left, Michael, I was surprised in a way you went to Politico because you were such a great general reporter. I always saw you, although it's different now, like as a guy writing for GQ or for Esquire, one of those your stories. And I always thought in a way, it's kind of crazy, but I really did that, God, you're going to politics, which is like, some of it can be interesting, but in terms of the world, in terms of the characters and people you've written about with the Times, I'm like, oh my God, it's kind of limiting. And yet, you really carved out a great niche, original niche there with these deep profiles. You mentioned Susan Wiles that you wrote about. I remember your Kamala Harris story from 2019 when she ran for president for the first time, which is being revisited right now, of course, because she's running away from a lot of the things she talked about back then. She's going to have to continue to. And you really got deep into the San Francisco political world, which, I think a lot of our listeners are now picking up on. It's a Nancy Pelosi world, a Willie Brown world, what have you. It's the late Dianne Feinstein, really insular place to break into. And you really kind of captured that in that story, which I thought was really, really great reporting.
It's one of the more interesting things about Kamala Harris, and you can look at it a variety of ways. One way to look at it is, she came out of as San Francisco politics. She's got some Oakland, some East Bay in her for sure. Like that is in some ways more formative even for her than San Francisco. But to be successful as a Democratic politician in and around San Francisco is not easy. I mean, there's lots of competition. It's a sharp-elbowed hothouse. Not so many Republicans, but sometimes that's more interesting to me. Sort of the intra-party factions. Like, how do you navigate your space? How do you not get outflanked on your left as a Democrat in San Francisco? So, to come out of San Francisco requires some real political skill. It just does. And so it's not an accident that you have Nancy Pelosi, San Francisco, Kamala Harris, San Francisco, Gavin Newsom, San Francisco. I mean, Newsom and Harris are, friends is not the right word, but like they came up concurrently.
Right.
And they're both extremely effective politicians overall. I mean, you can quibble, but and San Francisco is very much a part of that. Obviously, she'll be sort of characterized by the right in the coming weeks and months as classic San Francisco liberal. But obviously, it's for sure. I mean, it's just sitting there. It's too obvious to not use, but I also think it's like much more complicated than that in the way that she navigated, especially as a prosecutor, the San Francisco world. And not just as a prosecutor, but, as you know, in San Francisco, politics is so sort of tied up with society and even high society.
Right.
And, to some extent that exists everywhere, donor class and whatnot, but there's something like a little bit extra in San Francisco. And you can't come out of San Francisco and become a national figure without having figured out a way to navigate those cross currents in San Francisco. It's such an interesting place politically.
Go ahead.
Well, unless you want to stick on this topic, I was hoping in the last few minutes, if you, because you spend a lot of time reporting on regular people, like voters and whatnot, hanging out at rallies. What can you tell us? Explain for us in the last 4 minutes here what about the Johnson brothers, Ted and Fred Johnson. Who are they? What brought you to write about them? How are they interesting?
Yeah, Ted and Fred Johnson, they're brothers. Ted lives in New Hampshire. Fred lives in Louisville, Kentucky. Fred is very anti-Trump. Ted is quite pro-Trump. They don't talk because of this, because of other things too. But so I met Ted initially through a Nikki Haley rally last year in New Hampshire. He asked a question. Can you bring us back together? At the time, he didn't want to vote for Trump again. He wanted to move on. Maybe Nikki Haley, he was thinking, was the answer to this. Long story short, Nikki Haley was not the answer he was looking for. But he asked that question. That's how I came to know Ted. But really what was interesting to me is sort of the way that politics ruptured this relationship between these two brothers who used to be very, very close, and more broadly, their family. Their family's from Centralia, Illinois. Centralia, Illinois is a place, like a lot of places, used to be something it isn't anymore. A railroad town, a mining town, an oil boom town, used to be robust economically. People could make it work, healthy middle class. Now, very much not that way. And so the reason I continue to write and report on Ted and Fred and the Johnsons of Centralia is this idea that Ted articulated at one point, when I hear "Make America Great Again," I hear actually "Make Centralia Great Again." And so I do think they are emblematic of the way that politics has sort of torn apart families in like very visceral, ground level ways over the last however many years. And also where they're from is very representative of one reason Trump has been so politically successful to the extent that he has been over the last better part of a decade, and might continue to be. That you can't discount the idea that so many people are from places like Centralia feel like it used to work better. And you can argue, is this the best way to address some of these problems? But he has spoken to those problems, and people like Ted Johnson feel heard and seen.
Yeah.
Are you going to be able to not work while you're here with Ben on the boat?
That's the plan, but who knows? The phone's always with me. Yeah, but tomorrow's Saturday, so we'll see.
Michael Cruz,
yeah,
senior staff writer at Politico.
Michael, I hope we can. Yeah, you can come back again.
Yeah.
You said you come back to Florida. We'd love to have you back on the show because it's like it went too fast here.
Yeah, we should definitely do a whole show with you. That would be really great.
Let's do it.
Thanks for coming in, Michael Cruz, senior staff writer at Politico. At the top half of the show, thank you, Congressman Kathy Castor, for being here on behalf of myself, Ray Roa. Mitch Perry from the Florida Phoenix, independent author and boat captain and journalist. Ben Montgomery, Skip Sassy on the boards, DJ Spaceship on the phones today. Thank you so much for joining us and for listening to WMNF Tampa. Please stay tuned for Art in Your Ear with Joellen Schilke, the hostess who loves you the mostest, and I hope you have a really good weekend.